It takes like 5 round trips just to find related.
Yeah, it launched this April, and its code analysis runs locally with Tree Sitter.
Handing over a map up front instead of letting it. Renka, Sharina's stuck with Claude Code. I'm working on a pretty large repo, and the AI just keeps repeating grep and read over and over. It takes like 5 round trips just to find related files, and before I know it, the contexts run out.
That's such a classic problem with huge repos. The AI is feeling its way through files blindly, so it burns through tokens before it even gets to the actual task.
Exactly, and it ends up reading unrelated files too, so the answer's completely off base.
The real issue is the AI can't see the big picture of the repo. Sherry, have you heard of Graphify?
Never heard of it. What is it?
It's a skill that converts your entire repo into a knowledge graph and hands that to the AI. Instead of feeling around with grep, you let it query the graph.
So it gets the code structure figured out up front. Sharina wants to try that. I just checked Graphify on GitHub, and the star count is insane, right? It's over 90K.
Yeah, it launched this April, and it hit 91K stars in 3.5 months. It's a project that got accepted into this batch of Y Combinator.
It's not a skill collection or a framework. It's just a single-purpose skill, right? That kind of scale for something like that is kind of crazy.
The comparison is interesting. Anthropic's official skill collection has 160K, and mattpocock's skill collection is over 170K, and Graphify's a single command, but it's standing on the same level as those.
I guess it also helps that it works across 20+ environments, like Claude Code and Cursor.
That's part of it. Since it works the same way in any environment, the barrier to adoption is low.
When I hear knowledge graph, I picture embeddings or a vector DB.
That's where Graphify's different. It's not vector search, it's graph traversal, walking through nodes.
So instead of pulling things by similarity, it follows the relationships directly.
Right. So you'd get something like this class calling that function, or this module importing that one. The code structure itself becomes the edges. And on top of that, each edge gets tagged as either extracted or inferred.
What's the distinction there?
Extracted is a relationship read directly from the AST. It's something certain, like an import or a function call. Inferred is a relationship Graphify inferred through things like name resolution or import tracing.
So the source is made explicit, and that tells you how much to trust it.
Exactly. There's also ambiguous for the unclear cases.
Is this a ST analysis something it sends to an LLM?
Code analysis runs locally with Tree Sitter, so it costs 0 LLM credits. Nothing gets sent over the network either.
So for code alone, it's completely offline. That's kind of reassuring.
A model only comes into play when you're including things like docs or images.
So how much of a hassle is the install?
It's just 2 commands. First, you install the CLI with UV tool install Graphify.
Wait, Graphify? 2 Ys?
Yeah, the PyPI package name ends with 2 Ys. Graphify with just 1 Y is a different package, so if you get it wrong, it'll fail.
That was close. I would have typoed that for sure.
Next, you run Graphify install, and that registers the skill in Claude Code.
That's it. I don't need to write any config files.
Yeah, the install command automatically detects your environment and places the files it needs.
So then I can just type /Graphify and it'll work. Alright, let's actually try it. I just type /Graphify, right?
Right, that works if you're analyzing the current directory. Once it runs, you get 3 files output into a folder called Graphify out.
3? So it's not just a JSON.
Graph, JSON is the raw graph data, and Graph Report, MD, is the analysis report. And Graph HTML is a visualization file you can open in a browser.
It even gives you an HTML visualization. I want to see that.
Open Graph HTML in a browser, and you get a force-directed graph where the nodes spread out. Classes and functions become nodes, and calls or imports connect them as edges.
Oh, the nodes are colored. What's that distinguishing?
That's the community. basically the cluster. It uses an algorithm called the latent method, which automatically groups nodes that are closely related.
So just by looking at the colors, you can tell at a glance which areas form a cohesive set of features. You mentioned Tree Sitter does a ST parsing? How many languages does it support?
Over 36 languages, Python, TypeScript, Go, and Rust are a given. It also covers CUDA, Metal, and even Salesforce's Apex.
Even Apex, so enterprise devs can use it too.
What's interesting about Graphify though, is it's not just code. With the Postgres option, it can pull a PostgreSQL schema live.
So the database structure ends up in the graph too.
Right? Tables and columns become nodes, connected to the application code. And it can also read Terraform TF files. So your infrastructure definitions end up in the same graph.
So the app, the database, and the infrastructure all get unified into one graph.
Something like, which table does this API write to? And what infrastructure manages it? A question like that can be answered with a single query.
It said you can add PDF and images too. Do those end up in the graph as well?
Yeah, it uses an LLM to extract the content and turn it into nodes. It handles video too.
If a design doc PDF gets connected to the code, that should save a lot of time hunting for documentation. Okay, so we've got the graph. How do you actually use it?
There are 3 main commands: query, path, and explain. First, query lets you ask questions in natural language. For example, you can ask, what connects off to the database?
So instead of specifying keywords like with grep, you can just ask in plain English.
It traverses the graph with BFS and returns the related nodes. Next is the path command. It gives you the shortest path between 2 nodes. Type Graphify path fast API model field, and it'll tell you something like, connected in 3 hops.
So you can actually see the route showing how A and B are connected. That sounds handy when you're trying to trace dependencies.
And the last one, explain, lists out all the connections for a specific node. Type explain API router, and it shows everything that node calls and everything that calls it.
Does it also show the source line number and the community number?
It does. It shows which file and line, plus how many connections there are.
Should this Graphify out folder go into gitignore?
Actually, the opposite. It's better to commit it. The moment a team member pulls, they get access to the same shared graph.
So even someone new to the team can immediately get a grasp of the repo's structure.
Exactly. It cuts down a lot of onboarding effort.
But isn't it a pain to manually regenerate the graph every time the code changes?
There's a command called Graphify hook install that sets up a post-commit hook. Every time you commit, the graph automatically rebuilds.
But if everyone's editing graph, JSON, wouldn't merges cause conflicts?
That's covered too. It sets up a git merge driver at the same time. JSON is handled with a union merge, so it's designed to avoid conflicts.
So it's really built with team workflows in mind. Even if we build the graph, isn't it pointless if the AI just starts grepping on its own?
There's actually an option that forces it not to. Run Graphify Cloud install strict, and strict mode gets enabled.
What actually changes in strict mode?
Cloud Code has to query the graph before it can use read or grep. It uses something called a pre-tool use hook, which intercepts file reading operations.
So it makes the AI narrow things down with the graph before reading files directly.
Right. It prevents the context from overflowing from repeated grep calls, and cuts down on wasted reads of irrelevant files.
Sounds like this could actually solve the problem Sharina was stuck on earlier.
The bigger the repo, the more it helps, so give it a try.
Graphify's a skill, right? How is it different from mattpocock/skills?
They're in the same skill category, but the goals are completely different. Graphify is a skill for drawing a map of the repository. Mattpocock/skills is a collection of skills that inject conventions for how the AI should work.
What kind of conventions are we talking about, specifically?
Things like having it implement through a TDD loop, PR review steps, or how to approach domain modeling. It's mostly prompts and procedure docs inside. No heavy processing.
Graphify parses the whole ST with tree sitter, so that's a real contrast.
Exactly. So they're not competing. They're meant to be used together.
So you install both and switch between them depending on the situation.
Especially with huge repos, the natural flow is to start with Graphify to get a handle on the structure. Then you'd run mattpocock/skills/code review on top of that.
You mentioned earlier it's Graphify with 2 Ys. That's seriously easy to get wrong.
Yeah, one more thing. You should avoid pip install.
Why not pip? Seems like it should work fine.
The skill resolves its own Python runtime environment, and pip can end up conflicting with that. There have been reports on both Mac and Windows of it, failing with a module not found error.
That's why UV tool install is the recommended way.
Then there's the huge repository issue. Once you pass 5,000 nodes, Graphichtml gets pretty heavy.
The kind that freezes your browser when you open it.
Exactly, in that case, use no viz to skip the visualization, and just get the JSON output.
Handing over a map up front instead of letting it fumble around with grep is a pretty interesting idea.
AI good at doing what it's told, but without seeing the big picture, it tends to take the long way around. Just having it grasp the structure up front cuts down a lot of unnecessary file reads.
And the code parsing runs locally with tree sitter, so it's completely free.
Right? You can generate the graph without even needing an API key. Try it on a smaller repo first, and take a look at Graphichtml.
Watching the nodes spread out like that, the structure just kind of sinks in on its own.
The community color coding also makes it easy to see at a glance where functionality clusters together.
Sharina's going to try it right away on the repo she's currently stuck on.
Hope it frees you from running out of context.